My grandson dropped his juice box on the carpet, and I bent down to pick it up for him. That was the last kind thing anyone did for me that evening. I heard the crack before I felt it. My hip caught the edge of the bottom step. My shoulder hit the baseboard. And for about 4 seconds I lay completely still on the hardwood floor of my son's front hallway while the room above me kept on laughing. Not stopped, then laughed. Just kept going. The conversation about the Whistler ski trip simply continued without pause. And somewhere in those first 4 seconds, I understood exactly what my life had become. My name doesn't matter much to this story. What matters is that I am 63 years old. I live alone in a semi-detached house in Hamilton, Ontario. I drive a 2009 Civic with a cracked dashboard. And for the past 11 years, my son has been ashamed of me. His name is Tyler. He is 34 years old. He works in commercial real estate in Toronto. He belongs to a golf club in Oakville. And he married a woman named Cassandra, whose family owns 4 properties in Muskoka. I have met Cassandra's mother twice. Both times she looked at my jacket, the way you look at something the dog dragged in from the yard. Tyler's embarrassment started gradually, the way most things that eventually destroy you do. When he was in university, I was still the dad who drove 4 hours to help him move apartments, who sent extra money when OSAP came up short, who called every Sunday without fail. Then he got his first real job. Then he met Cassandra's circle. Then the Sunday calls got shorter. Then less frequent. Then mostly just texts, saying things like busy week, talk soon. What Tyler never knew, what I made sure Tyler never knew, was what I did for a living. He thought I worked in logistics. That's the word I used when he asked as a teenager. And it was technically accurate enough that I never corrected it. I ran a supply chain software company out of a small office on Barton Street. We had 11 employees at our peak. We were not glamorous. We were not the kind of company that got written about, but we had a very specific client base in the agricultural sector across Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. And when a larger firm in Calgary made us an offer in 2019, I sold for $4.2 million after tax. I did not buy a new house. I did not buy a new car. I increased my contributions to the food bank where I volunteered on Tuesday mornings, and I put the rest into a registered account that my lawyer Margaret helped me structure very carefully over several months. Margaret has been my lawyer since 1998. She is precise. She is unsentimental. And she does not waste words. When I told her what I wanted to do with the proceeds, she looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "You're sure about the conditions I told her I was?" She said, "Then let's make sure it's airtight." We spent the better part of 6 months making it airtight. I want you to understand what those 6 months felt like. Tyler had just missed my 62nd birthday because Cassandra's family had booked a cottage long in advance. He sent a gift card from a grocery store chain. The card that came with it said, "Hope you have a good one, Dad." He'd had my address auto-filled. I know because the envelope was printed, not handwritten, and there was a little Avery label smear on the back flap where the sticker had half peeled. I put the gift card in a kitchen drawer. I drove to my Tuesday shift at the food bank. I called Margaret in the afternoon and we kept working. This past November, Tyler turned 34. Cassandra organized a dinner party at their house in the Junction neighborhood of Toronto, a renovated Victorian semi that I know cost them just under $1 million for. Because Tyler mentioned the number once in a tone that was supposed to sound casual, but was actually the opposite of casual. He invited me, which I took as a good sign. I brought a bottle of red I'd been holding on to for a few years, a Niagara Peninsula Cabernet Franc from a small winery I liked. Not expensive, but genuinely good. Cassandra's friend Waverly poured it, looked at the label, and said, "Oh, local." She said it the way you say, oh, margarine, when someone's brought margarine to a butter household. There was a small ripple of polite laughter around the table. Tyler did not say anything. Cassandra's brother, Derek, who works in finance and says so within about 90 seconds of meeting anyone, asked what I did. I said I'd been in logistics and was semi-retired now. He nodded slowly, the way people nod when they're already composing their next sentence. He said, "Good for you. Taking it easy." He was 31 years old. I smiled and passed the breadbasket. My grandson, Tyler, and Cassandra's boy, 4 years old, named Oliver, had been sitting beside me all evening. He is a serious, watchful child with a tendency to narrate everything he's looking at in a low voice, like a nature documentary. He'd been whispering descriptions of the pasta to himself for several minutes when he reached for his juice box and knocked it sideways. The purple grape juice went across the tablecloth. Cassandra made a sound, the kind of sound that is technically not words but communicates a full paragraph. I got up to help Oliver, because he looked frightened by the sound his mother had made. He hadn't done anything wrong. He was 4. Juice boxes tip over. I gathered some napkins, got Oliver settled, and then turned to go back to my seat at the far end of the table. And this is where I have to be honest with you. I don't know exactly what happened next. The rug in Tyler's hallway, the one that runs between the dining room and the front entrance, has been pulling away from its gripper strip along one edge for as long as I've been visiting. I noticed it the first time I came to the house after they moved in. I thought about mentioning it. I didn't, because by that point, mentioning things to Tyler felt like a transaction that would cost me something I couldn't afford to keep spending. The edge of that rug caught the toe of my shoe. I went down hard on my right knee, then my right palm, then my hip hit the floor. It was not dramatic. I did not cry out. I made a sound, the involuntary kind, and I was still. What happened in the next 30 seconds is the part I keep returning to. Derek said something about getting back to what he'd been saying about interest rates. Waverly laughed at the tail end of whatever joke had apparently just been completed before I fell. Cassandra said, "Tyler, the rug, and Tyler, my son, who I drove 4 hours to help move apartments, who I sent OSAP money to, who I called every Sunday." Tyler looked at me on the floor of his hallway and said, "You all right, Dad," without getting up. The way you ask if someone's all right when you already need them to say yes, so the conversation can move forward. I said yes. I got up by myself. I put my hand on the wall and I stood up slowly, and I walked back to the table and I sat down. Oliver watched me the whole time. He was the only one. I stayed another 40 minutes. I helped clear the pasta bowls because it seemed like the thing to do, and because I did not know what else to do with my hands. When I put on my coat at the door, Tyler was mid-story about a commercial property deal in Mississauga. He paused and said, "Thanks for coming, Dad. Drive safe." Cassandra waved from the kitchen without turning around. I walked to my car. I sat in the driver's seat of my 2009 Civic for probably 6 minutes before I started the engine. My knee was sore. My hip ached. My right palm had a red pressure mark from the floor. I thought about the rug. I thought about the sound Cassandra had made when Oliver spilled his juice. I thought about Derek and interest rates and Waverly and, local. I thought about Tyler not standing up. Then I thought about Margaret, and the 6 months we had spent, and the document that had been sitting in a locked drawer in her office on King Street West since March of 2019. I drove home to Hamilton. I called Margaret the next morning at 8:45. She picked up on the second ring, which told me she had been expecting this call at some point. I said, "I think it's time." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'll pull the file. Let me explain what we had built. When I sold the company, I didn't put the proceeds into a standard investment account with a beneficiary designation pointing to Tyler. That would have been the obvious thing. Margaret and I did something different. We established a private family trust, a discretionary trust under Ontario law, administered by Margaret as the independent trustee. The capital sat there, invested conservatively, growing modestly. Tyler was a named potential beneficiary, but the trust had conditions, not punitive conditions, not cruel ones, conditions that reflected something I had been thinking about for a long time, which is the difference between receiving something and earning the right to receive it. The primary condition was simple. The trustee would not distribute principal to any beneficiary who had not maintained a genuine, documented relationship with the settlor, meaning me, for a continuous period of not less than 3 years immediately prior to distribution. Genuine and documented meant more than Christmas texts and birthday gift cards with Avery labels on the back. Margaret had helped me define it carefully. Regular contact, physical visits, evidence of reciprocal care. There was a second condition. Any beneficiary who contested the trust structure, or who attempted to have the conditions varied or removed, would be automatically and permanently excluded. There was a third provision, which was not a condition but a direction. If Tyler never satisfied the primary condition for any reason, including my death before the relationship was repaired, the capital, in full, would transfer to Oliver's trust, a separate structure, independently managed, released to Oliver in stages beginning at age 25. Tyler would have no access to it, no oversight of it, and no ability to influence it. Oliver, the 4-year-old who watched me get up off the floor by myself. The morning after Tyler's birthday dinner, I called Margaret. 3 days later, she sent a letter to Tyler's home address, by registered mail, requiring a signature. The letter informed him that his father had established a family trust in 2019 and that he wished to meet with Tyler at Margaret's office to discuss certain matters relating to his estate. Tyler called me that afternoon. His voice had a quality I hadn't heard in years. It was uncertain. He said, "Dad, what is this about? Are you sick?" I told him I wasn't sick. I told him I had made some financial arrangements some years ago and that I thought it was time he understood what they were. He said, "How much are we talking about?" And I want to tell you something about that question. About the way he asked it. About the speed with which that uncertainty turned into a different kind of attention. Because I heard it. I heard exactly what was behind it. And I kept my voice steady, and I said, "We'll talk about everything at Margaret's office." We met the following Tuesday. Tyler arrived 12 minutes late and spent the first 90 seconds explaining about the QEW. Cassandra was not with him. Margaret sat across the table in the way she always sits still, attentive, giving nothing away, and she walked Tyler through the trust structure. The conditions, the provisions. Tyler listened. His expression went through several stages. The stage that stays with me most was not the surprise, and it was not the anger that came briefly after the surprise. It was the stage where he looked at me across the conference table and something recalibrated behind his eyes, like a building shifting on its foundation. He said, "You've had this since 2019 and you never said anything I told him that was correct." He said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, "Because the kind of relationship the trust requires can't be built in response to finding out about the trust. It has to already exist." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What about the condition, the 3 years of contact? Does the clock start now?" And here is what I told him. I told him that the clock, in a sense, had never stopped, that I had called him every Sunday for years before the calls got shorter, that I had driven 4 hours to help him move apartments, that I had been in his dining room 11 days ago and gotten up off his hallway floor by myself while he asked from his chair if I was all right. I told him I was not angry. I told him the truth, which is that I was tired, that there is a kind of fatigue specific to loving someone who has decided your life is less valuable than their embarrassment. I told him that the trust conditions were not a punishment. They were a description of what a relationship actually looks like, and that the question of whether he and I could build that was entirely up to him, and that I genuinely did not know the answer, and that I had accepted not knowing. Tyler didn't say anything for a while. Margaret refilled her water glass. Outside, on King Street West, a streetcar went by. Tyler said, "What happens to Oliver either way?" I told him Oliver was protected. I told him about the independent trust, the staged distributions, the structure that would ensure Oliver had options regardless of what Tyler and I figured out between ourselves. Tyler's jaw tightened slightly. I think some part of him had spent the past 11 minutes calculating whether he could influence Oliver's share through his own. The answer was no. And I watched him understand that. Then something happened that I had not planned for. Tyler put both hands flat on the conference table and looked at them for a moment. And then he said, "I didn't get up. At dinner, when you fell, I should have gotten up." It was 11 words. He said them quietly, not performing them, not as a strategy, just as a statement of fact about something he had done. I'm 63 years old. I've been a father for 34 years. I know the difference between a man recalibrating his financial position and a man recognizing something true about himself. I have spent enough years in a room with Tyler to read the difference in his shoulders. I said, "No, you should have." We sat there for another few minutes. Margaret, to her credit, said nothing. I want to be accurate with you about what happened next, because I think the honest version is more useful than the satisfying version. Tyler and I did not leave that office and suddenly become close again. There was no scene in the parking lot. He did not cry. I did not forgive him in any theatrical way. We shook hands, which felt strange and also correct. He asked if he could call me on Sunday. I said yes. He called on Sunday. It was 18 minutes long, which is about 16 minutes longer than the calls had been for the past 3 years. He asked about my knee. He asked about the food bank. He asked about a book I'd mentioned reading once, months ago, that I'd honestly forgotten he'd registered. We talked about Oliver, about how Oliver had apparently started narrating the family dog's movements like a nature documentary, which I found delightful, and which made Tyler laugh in a way that sounded like him at 20. I don't know what the 3 years will look like. I don't know if we'll satisfy the conditions or not. Margaret knows that I would modify the structure if I genuinely believed the relationship had been repaired. Condition, or no condition. Because the trust was never about the money. Tyler may or may not understand that yet. What I know is this: my hip healed in about 2 weeks. The pressure mark on my palm was gone by morning. The rug in Tyler's hallway has since been retacked to its gripper strip, which I know because I was there for dinner, 3 weeks after the meeting at Margaret's office. And I walked across it twice, and it held. Oliver sat beside me again. He spent the meal providing quiet commentary on the contents of his plate. When I got up to leave, he followed me to the door and held onto my sleeve for a moment without saying anything, just watching me put on my coat. Cassandra came out of the kitchen and said, "Thank you for coming." And she looked at me when she said it. Small things. I know they're small things, but I grew up in Brantford, Ontario, in a house where my own father communicated mostly by not communicating, where I learned that love was something you inferred from the absence of cruelty rather than the presence of kindness. I spent a significant part of my adult life trying to do better than that for Tyler, and I spent another part of it watching what I'd built get taken for granted. And I spent the part after that deciding quietly and without drama what I was and wasn't willing to accept. The money is not the point. The money was never the point. The money was just the only language I had left that Tyler was sure to hear. I am 63 years old. I drive a 2009 Civic. I volunteer at a food bank on Tuesday mornings. I have a grandson who narrates the world in a low, serious voice, like it's the most interesting place he's ever been. Which, maybe it is. My son called me on Sunday. We talked for 18 minutes. He asked how my knee was doing. That's where we are. And for right now, that's enough.